Okay, part two. Alt-right conservatism, to sum it up, censors, bans, controls thought. Uh, they do not like creativity, creative thinking, and uh, they need to suppress people into a traditional viewpoint. And anything that strays from that is uh, given all sorts of name calling, evil, wrong, bad, corrupt, abusive, from their thinking. And they don't see it as being abusive and corrupt thinking on their part. They do not admit they're in the wrong. They do not admit that taking away people's freedom is wrong. They don't see it that way. They cannot comprehend that such a thing would be wrong. And so that's why you have Jeff Flake, the senator, getting cornered in an elevator and him feeling bad about how our nation is being torn apart. But all he does is extend the period of time to placate the victims of sexual abuse, and then goes and votes for Kavanaugh anyway. That's the alt-right thinking. And Jeff Flake, by the way, is Mormon, and we'll get into that. I don't know if in this segment, because this is going to be a series, so hang on to your hats. Uh, uh, so, yeah, alt-rights do not see themselves as evil. They see themselves as saviors of mankind, the ones who know how to fix humanity's problem and don't see themselves as being the problem that causes all the mess. And that's what they do. And so Orrin Hatch in the Senate, he got cornered in an elevator, and he just dismissed the people outright. Grow up, he said. You know, women of sexual abuse, and he tells them to grow up. And then when asked about whether he believed Dr. Ford, who was a psychiatrist, so I was kind of like, oh, I don't know, I don't really like this, but, you know, it's clear she was victimized. And Kavanaugh, it's clear he was lying outright to cover his butt and get the job. But Hatch said when talking about whether he believed her, he instead used the Mormon code word, she's pleasing. It's a Mormon code word for sexual attraction. So none of the news got it. Left wing, right wing, they never got it. You have to understand Mormon culture to understand what he was saying to her, about her. He was sexually assaulting, verbally sexually assaulting, a victim of sexual assault. That's alt-right conservatism. That's what Trump does. He verbally sexually harasses people who are victims of sexual abuse. The kitty cat tape. And then, yes, it's not the kitty cat tape. It's called something else. Because Trump is recorded as saying something else about how he can grab them and get away with it. Because he's a celebrity. He can get away with whatever he wants. That's the alt-right thinking. That is Kavanaugh's alt-right thinking. He is a boy of privilege, so he can get away with anything and everything he wants. So that's the family life I grew up in. But interestingly, even though I was born into alt-right privilege, I rebelled. And so I was denied the privileges because of my rebellion. And that's where extortion comes in. If I had just complied, I would have been given white alt-right privilege. But I rebelled, and so people kept trying to suppress me. When Stan Lowry touched me on my shoulders in PE when we were playing tag football, I tripped up my foot, and as a result fell and cracked my inner bone, or the inner part of my bone. It wasn't broken, it was just cracked. And Stan Lowry was black. His father was in the new subdivision where we lived. We were white privileged to be able to get into a new subdivision. It didn't occur to me back then that blacks were being suppressed. I had the thinking that everyone was equal, everyone was human. So I didn't understand when my peers were making racial jokes, sexist jokes, that it actually was believed by my peers to be the case. I just thought it was jokes, and they joke around with about everybody and anything, because even I got picked on. So they were making jokes about everybody equally. So I didn't see that there was racist, sexist, discriminatory behavior, because everybody was treated poorly equally. So to have a black family in a dominantly white suburban neighborhood, a new subdivision. When we first moved there, houses were still being built. You have to be rich, because at the beginning, that's how much they charge, is the most they can get. And Stan's family were able to get a house there. And looking back, I realize his father, Stan's father, was a revolutionary. I don't know what he did for a living, but he must have been smart. And so when Stan, when I cracked my leg, the school administrators and the PE people, they blamed Stan for doing it on purpose, as if he tried to tackle me. Because we boys always joked about, hey, let's play tackle and not do the school's law of only touch. Because I've been in the school system long enough that boys don't like to be nice. Even the game Red Rover, where you run to the other side and try to break through the arm clasps of the other people, the boys were so strong that they would specifically target the girls who would play the game, because they were the weak link. And the girls would give up because they don't want to get hurt. And they did get hurt, and the girls were complaining that they were getting hurt in the game, that's how it's played. And so we were banned from playing Red Rover because people were getting hurt. And in high school, we were banned from spiking the volleyball. That's part of the game, is spiking the volleyball, but in PE they banned it because I was branding people. People were getting Spalding written on their chests branded on their chests because I was hitting it so hard. And they were saying, no, don't hit it so hard. That's the game. You know, but yeah, that's alt-right conservative thinking, is you have to censor, ban, control the game, the environment, the events, because they don't want to have the game played as it's supposed to be played. But so have I talked enough about my mom? Do you understand the kind of environment that I lived in? When I had a problem, I couldn't go to my mom, because if there was something that I wanted knowledge about, my mom would say, do you have that problem? Do I need to take you to the hospital? Is that what's going on? I couldn't inquire about things because she thought I was actually involved in them. And so I learned that I can no longer talk with my mom about things. She was no longer a source for communication. And this was long before Google, long before the internet. And so if we didn't have the books that covered the topic that I wanted to learn, I was out of luck. And so my education was stifled. I was a very curious boy, but I was not given the answers to the questions that I had. And even sex. I had to keep it all a secret as I went through puberty, because my parents believed that sexual behavior was bad and that I couldn't talk about it, or they couldn't talk about it to me. My mom went to my sisters on the one evening where they had the sex talk with all of us kids. My sisters described exact gory detail of what Mom discussed with them about male and female sexuality. My dad, however, he stood there in the doorway, and we stood there, and he said, you guys are growing up and you're probably experiencing changes, and so if you ever have any questions, just ask them and I'll answer them. My dad wrote a book on the changes during puberty. He wrote a book on it. It was a kid's book, and it had cartoon illustrations in it. It's no longer available for print, and so you can't get it anywhere. But he wrote a book on it, and that was my education. If you have any questions, ask. He was turned to alt-right conservatism and had to go to work 16 hours a day, 6 days a week. Because he's the head of the household, he needs to provide for his family. And that meant staying away from home, not to deal with the mess at home, and bring in the money. So that when he comes home, he can just relax and rest before he has to go back to work again the next day. That's his thinking as an alt-right converter. And so there was no positive relationship with my dad either. He grew up on a farm and was expected by my grandfather to know what to do and provide my grandfather with what he needed when he needed it. So my grandmother had to know what he wanted for food or condiments and pass them to him before he even asks. Because if he had to ask, you're doing it wrong and you need to be chastised and belittled. And So my dad picked up on that too, but my mom, being an alt-right conservative, she put him in his place right from the very beginning of the marriage. You will not have me expect to wait on you hand and foot and know exactly what you're wanting without you saying it. So even Democrat minds have incorrect thinking in them. So that's the family life I grew up in, and nobody understands it because we were well behaved. We were privileged. You know, any sport I went into, I got the equipment that I needed. But my parents considered themselves poor. But they were making lots of money. My dad didn't want to reveal how much he was making, but we had a $200,000 brand new suburban home. Back then, that's a lot of money. Now, out here in Utah, by the Daybreak area, you know, the starting home price is $500,000. So you can see $300,000 more after all these decades. And it's a debate as to whether 500,000 is more percentage-wise than 200,000 was back then. Yeah, so I was expected to learn how to behave and act in society, and I was constantly belittled by my dad because I didn't know how to do things. I had to learn it all by myself, by trial and error. I was not taught. You know, when you teach kids, if you let them learn by their mistakes, kids are going to lose limbs. Kids are going to get an eye poked out. I almost did. I ran into a tree branch that my dad neglected to cut that was on his honey-do list. And so after I ran into it, playing out in the yard, because Mom didn't want to have me running around the house, I went to the hospital, had a patch on my eye for a week, and my dad immediately cut down the limb to cross that off his honey-do list. But it was a little too late by then. But that's the alt-right thinking that I will try to bring up later on, because that same type of stunt was done to me just recently, within the past couple of weeks, here in Utah regarding my apartment, because it's that same type of thinking that is applied. When somebody makes a complaint, and in this case I just ran into the tree branch and almost lost my eye. I've still got the scar damage. So when I go to get my eyes checked, the eye doctor says, "Oh, you got a scar in your eye." Yeah, that's from a tree branch. And that's part of the alt-right conservative thinking, is that when there is a problem that occurs, somebody complains, they cover it up so that when an investigation is done, there's no evidence of the problem that people were complaining about. That's the alt-right thinking. Out of sight, out of mind. And then you can justify saying, hey, this person who's complaining is just trying to hurt us. We're the victims. Remember, they turn it back around so that they become the victims even though they were the abusers. And that's what my dad did. He cut down the tree finally so that if there were any investigation into child abuse, there would be none. And that's what I'm having to deal with here in my apartment. is that I filed a complaint with uh, the renters, with the government, and the renters covered it up so that when the government investigates, they won't find the evidence that I was complaining about because they've covered it up. The website is now changed. They've taken down the previous notifications. They've added new upgraded notifications. And all of this was done after I complained. And so I'm being attacked, but they don't see it as attacking me. They see it as I'm attacking them. They don't get it. They don't see that they cannot control people's lives. I cannot be denied my rights. I must be free. But when you have alt-right controlling the situation, they emphasize security over rights. That's what they call it, is security. And that's what my parents thought that they were doing. They were protecting their kids by controlling their behavior. That is the alt-right thinking. Okay, so I think I can go on to peers back in my childhood. I went to Michigan to start school in kindergarten, and kindergarten was obviously liberal because they had a chest full of men's and women's clothes, boys and girls' clothes, and we were allowed dress-up time where we could dress up in different clothes. Now the school was thinking, oh, this is to teach kids or check to see if kids know how to dress themselves. But also it allowed for those liberal wingnuts to have boys dress up as girls and girls as guys. You know, if alt-rights found out about what was done in the kindergarten class, they would be appalled and shut it down immediately. But oh man, I started an exercise routine today, and I'll get into that later, but because that involves alt-right and the conspiracy of the alt-right against me. Okay. So kindergarten, trans dressing. I was able to distinguish between men's and boys and girls' clothes, and so I didn't participate in dressing up like a girl. But I did find in my mom's dresser oversized lingerie, and I was like, oh, what is this? But yeah, kids should not know about their parents' sexual behavior. That just traumatizes us for life. Man. Oh man. Okay, so kindergarten, or not kindergarten. Well, let's move on to first grade. First grade, I had a male teacher, Mr. Childs, and I still remember to this day because it was a traumatic dream that I had. I was having traumatic dreams in Michigan, and I still remember them. Well, one dream I had, and I really hope it's a dream, but yet if it is a dream, why am I, as a kindergartner, dreaming about something like this? I was going to school in the dream, and I had to walk because Mom again had kids to take care of, so she needed me to be independent, and so she tried to make sure that I learned how to get to school on my own by walking, so that she didn't have to drive me each and every day. And so I go out to school, and I see Beth, a schoolmate, across the street, and she's also walking to school. She lives in the neighborhood. And so I go across the street to walk with her to school. And I had a childhood crush on her. And as a child, you don't behave in a predatory manner because you're not in puberty yet. And so it's an innocent childhood friendship. And so we were walking to school, and then in the dream, I hope it was a dream, two older kids came up from behind us, and they were taller than both of us. And they were picking on Beth. And I immediately went into shock. And I just stood there paralyzed, looking on in horror. And Beth was sexually assaulted in the dream. I hope it was a dream. But why is a kindergarten boy having dreams like that? Because if it was real and I was actually traumatized, and that Beth was actually victimized, that's the alt-right conservative behavior. That boys are just being boys. And you heard it with Kavanaugh. You hear it with all sexual assault cases where white men are involved. But Mr. Childs had us learn how to write. And he went according to our ability. So if we were still learning and developing, he would provide us things to copy. He would provide us sentences to copy down. And if we were able to learn ourselves and advance in the class, we were welcomed and encouraged to write our own sentences for things. And we were given a project each and every single day that we had to do. And some of it involved drawing pictures, others writing sentences or paragraphs of something discussed on the card that we had for the day. And at the end of the school year, he compiled it all into a book, and we got to have a book of our school projects, which was pretty cool until my dad ended up destroying it so that I no longer have it as a memory. But that's the alt-right conservative thinking. And I'll get to that later on. So I'm going to make them 30-minute video segments here, so this is going to be a long video series. But Mr. Childs would come by and check out everybody's progress to see how they're doing. And one assignment, a peer in my class, the boy came talking to me about how he had seen the movie Jaws that had come out in the theaters, and his parents took him to see it, and he was writing about it and drawing a picture about it in his assignment, because to him that was something impactful on his life. And so he showed me what he experienced from the movie. And of course, if you've seen the movie, it involved naked women swimming and getting eaten by sharks. Yeah, that's Jaws. naked women getting eaten by sharks. And so, yeah, Trump is afraid of sharks, and he sexually abuses women. So, interesting. But anyway, the teacher came by, saw what the boy had drawn. It was a naked woman on skis with a shark behind her about to swallow her whole. And it, of course, is in a first grader's drawing style, so it's not a masterpiece of art, of realism. It's specifically in a crayon style level. But the teacher saw that and did the right thing. Even though for the boy, it was something that impacted his life, and he was telling about it through the class assignment. But the boy thought that that was acceptable behavior from what he saw in the movie, that it's okay to exploit women and have them murdered by sharks. And the teacher wisely said, no, I'm sorry, you cannot treat women like this. And so he put a stop to it early on in our lives, that such thinking about women was unacceptable. And so that was my Michigan experience. And the 30 minutes are up for this segment, so we'll get into segment 3 next here.